Start the live stream now. I will now call to order the study session meeting of April 19th, 2021. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, this meeting is being held electronically, and members of council are participating remotely pursuant to the council's electronic participation policy. Public access to the meeting is available on the local government access channel 8 for Comcast subscribers and on the city's YouTube channel online, and by telephone using the call-in numbers posted on the meeting agenda. Joanna, will you call the roll, please?
Mayor Leidy?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Wilford?
Here.
Councilmember Witkovich?
Here.
Councilmember Peterson?
Here.
Councilmember Downing?
Here.
Councilmember Brown?
Here.
Councilmember Goff?
Here.
Councilmember Duran Malika?
Here.
Councilmember Escobar?
Here.
Thank you.
Excellent. So we have 4 items on our agenda for tonight's study session. The first one is the Municipal Court Quarterly Update. We have Judge Bailhash with us to provide an update to Council. I think. I don't see her. I'm wondering if we should flip-flop agenda items. So Heather, let me know if you see her pop on.
Yes, and I will try to reach out to her. So
Okay.
My apologies.
No worries, things happen. So the second one is an update on the Tri-County Health Department COVID-19 Public Health Order extension. So Rupa Venkatesh, our assistant to the city manager, has an update for council. I think, Rupa, are you with us?
Jesus.
She is as well. However, she's having technical difficulty. Let me.
That's okay.
Oh,
I can move on. I can move on. Is Brooke here?
No, Rupa's here.
Okay.
We just can't hear you, Rupa.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So thank you for having me, Mayor and City Council, tonight. And as you may have noticed, in April, we've had a flurry of public health orders, both from the state and Tri-County Health Department. So this presentation tonight will cover the mask orders and the COVID-19 dial. So if we want to move to the first slide, thank you. So right now, as it stands, there are no state or Tri-County Health Department outdoor mask mandates. There never was a state one. At one point, there was one with Tri-County, but as of right now, there are no outdoor mask mandates. And the state indoor mask mandate was extended on April 3rd, and it will expire on May 4th. As it relates to Tri-County Health Department, the mask mandate was extended to May 15th. And Tri-County Health Department has indicated that it may be extended to June 30th, as it was in the original draft. But Tri-County Health Department received some pushback from other counties, since other counties in our region only extended it for 30 days. So as of right now, we have an indoor mask mandate that will expire on May 15th unless amended or extended by Tri-County. As it relates to our COVID-19 dial, so the state retired the dial statewide on April 16th, and the authority shifts to the counties. So our authority is Tri-County Health Department. The state also restricted unseated indoor capacity to less than 500, and all state restrictions lift on May 16th. But of course, we have to follow the most restrictive guidelines, and that is Tri-County Health Department. So on the next slide, we can cover what Tri-County Health Department, what their current order is, their current public health order. So as of April 16th, Adams County is now in level blue. So all counties within the jurisdiction will be required to follow the 6-foot social distancing requirement, but we are currently in level blue. Starting on May 16th, we'll be entering into a observation period. So all counties will be what's called level clear, which means that there's no restrictions. But again, the face covering restrictions still apply until May 15th, unless amended by Tri-County Health Department. And then once we're in level clear, Tri-County Health Department will observe hospital admission rates for each county. And if we go to the next slide, the hospital admission rate will be calculated by daily admissions per 100,000 population. So they're going to look at that over a 14-day rolling average, and then for 7 consecutive days. So for example, right now, as of April 13th, Adams County's rate is 1.06. So if we are still at 1.06 when it comes to May 16th, we'll still be in level clear. But if our rate moves above 2 and it stays there for 7 consecutive days, then we would be moved back down to level blue. And then the restrictions for level blue are going to apply at that point. And you can see what the different metrics are for the rates as defined in the public health order. And then the other public health order that the state put out on Friday, again, relates to mass indoor gatherings, which is defined as 100 or more people. So if, so events, indoor events can still operate at 100% capacity if that capacity does not exceed 500 people. And even at 100% capacity, the 6-foot distancing still is required. But venues can apply for variances to exceed 500 with Tri-County Health Department's approval, and then final approval by CDPHE, and then face coverings are required for all mass indoor gatherings by the state. And then there's also a provision for outdoor events that requires CDPHE approval, and this state public health order expires on May 16th unless extended or amended. So I know that's a lot of information. Oh, and one last slide. So this is what council has done to date. So the mayor issued an emergency declaration on March 13th, which was extended to April 13th, and it expires on termination by council. So our recommendation for the emergency declaration, which council does not have to even react to tonight if you don't want to, is to tie it to that 90-day observational period. So the 90-day observational period lifts on August 16th. And at that point, we can revisit if Tri-County Health Department is going to offer any more public health orders. And if they don't, council may want to consider expiring that emergency declaration. And just as a reminder, we also have the mask resolution that was issued by council on May 18th, but this was a directive, not a mandate. And in the directive or the resolution, there is a provision that says that it will expire when the emergency declaration expires. If council wants to be more restrictive than the Tri-County Health Department order, then council can certainly consider that through an ordinance. So that's something for council's consideration if you even want to revisit that. So with that, I can take any questions that you all may have.
Councilmember Goff.
Thank you, Mayor. Took me a minute to find the little button. And I know I read this and you've said it, but maybe I missed it. So there is no limit on outdoor activities. Is that correct?
Yeah, so once we move to level clear on May 16th, there's going to be no restrictions whatsoever.
Okay. All right. I'm just thinking of some of the events that the city had been thinking about for the summer. So I just wanted to clarify that. All right. Thank you.
Diana.
And we had conflicting information. There is no limit, but you still have to maintain 6-foot distancing. So that adds a capacity issue for our facilities. So, yes, I think she's right. There's no restrictions, but we do have to have enough room where there's 6 feet of space. So that puts a cap on how many people we can have in some of our stuff.
But that 6-foot distancing requirement also lifts once we move to level clear, which happens on May 16th.
Okay. All right. That's not what I heard from Steven. So I'll pass along the good news, I think. I don't feel like it's always moving, right? So it's kind of interesting to plan. Thanks.
Moving target.
That's kind of why I was asking the question because thank you.
We're not planning anything that even remotely looks like normal, just so you know, really until August and September for exactly this reason. But we have a lot of things planned. So the more people, the merrier. That makes it easier.
So I don't see a whole lot of hands. I'm wondering, I mean, I have a lot of concerns about this. I'm a little nervous about this for sure. But it seems like we do need to make a decision as council. Is that correct, Rupa? We're talking about the emergency declaration.
Yeah, you don't have to make a decision on that tonight. Our recommendation to consider for council to lift the emergency declaration won't be until after we're past the observational period, and that doesn't happen until August.
Okay. Councilmember Goff.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a little comment that I think that's a wise move simply because if we try to be more strict than the county or our, all of our neighboring communities, then the enforcement issue becomes more problematic and also just that it's so confusing to people. You just cross the street and you have to wear a mask or you don't or whatever. So I think holding off, just kind of maintaining what Tri-County Health is suggesting and what we already have in place is a good idea.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not suggesting we do anything like that. We're way too small within the county to take something on like that. I was on the Tri-County update call on Thursday, and I think I expressed my frustration at that point because there's already some confusion between the state, the county, and municipalities. And then when you go to their website, it's like, okay, we'll read this except for CDC. And then this is what it says except for, and it's like, wow, all of those, but, however, except, I'm like, I can't track this. So Rupa, I appreciate you always trying to be a sense maker for that. I'm just watching the data closely and am concerned about our numbers going up. Councilmember Malika?
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in and actually follow what Catherine was going to say. I think, moving forward, if we could stay tightly aligned with Tri-County, I think it would be helpful. I know that the local public health departments are really trying to stay in line with each other, even though the state has veered a turn. And so we're trying to make it consistent, among the counties, unless you decide to opt out. That's a different issue. And so I think that, it's good that we're moving slow. And I just want to, just let people know that everyone wants this pandemic to be over. We all want it to be over, right? But as Meredith was alluding to, we do have some cases that are starting to creep up there. And it is going to impact our schools as well. My daughter was out of school last week because somebody in her class somebody's parent tested positive. And so you have to remember that, we're still seeing lots of cases. Those variants are a mixed bag. We're not quite sure how they're going to react across the county. And then, it's impacting not only, our nursing homes again, but our schools. So we're just trying to make it through the school year. And we want to be as safe as possible. So everyone wants it to be over, but, slow and steady. Let's see what what comes out in the next couple months. And I think that, you know, we're taking the right approach here.
Yeah, I think so too. I just, as the numbers go up and the letters from schools, because I've gotten a letter almost every day from the high school. And so it just makes me worried, and not worried about our events, because I know that almost 100% of people surveyed want the world to open up, open, like an old Mervyn's commercial. But I'm just worried about the health and safety, because I'm still, you know, hearing, oh, a friend of mine died, and my uncle died, my aunt died. Like, it's still happening. And to pretend like it's not, I think is dangerous. So just something to be really mindful of. And so that would be the reason that I try very hard to push vaccinations. I know some of our residents are not interested, but if the interested parties want to be vaccinated, we have ways for them to do that. So I don't want anyone to be struggling with, where do I find one? How can I get one? Because there's so many opportunities now that if a resident wants a vaccine, we can help them get one. Well, Rupa, I don't see any more comments, so thank you for your presentation. And I believe Judge Bailhash has joined us.
I have.
Hi.
Good evening. Hope everybody's doing well.
Yes.
I wanted to do my quarterly update. As I sat down to write my memo, I felt like I didn't have a lot to talk about, but I wanted to get the quarterly update calendared and in front of you guys, just to let you all know what's going on with the court. So I think the most exciting thing is that we're figuring out how to really run efficiently and get up and running well. And when the county moved to level orange in November, we made the decision to stop in-person court and go to full virtual. And then we were doing full virtual until March. And then in March, we started resuming in-person trials. So the trial is when the person says, I'm not guilty. You need to prove that I'm guilty. And we stagger people in, so they're coming in 30-minute increments. And so officers are coming in to testify, or lay witnesses, and defendants are there. And it really is a much more effective way to conduct a trial. I think there's a lot more meaningful cross-examination to have everybody physically in the same room together. We've decided to keep traffic court virtual. I think that we've had a lot of success. Last week in our traffic docket, we only had one person fail to appear, which is pretty remarkable. It's nice for people to not have to take off an entire day of work or to arrange childcare when they have a traffic ticket to address in court. And so the benefit of doing virtual court for traffic is allowing people to be at work or be at home with their kids and being able to mute and turn their cameras off while they're waiting for their case to be called. And we've gotten a good response to that. So we're going to be switching to a hybrid docket where traffic cases will be virtual. And then criminal cases will be held in person. I think that when defendants are charged with criminal crimes and they're facing a jail sentence, it's important for them to be in court in order for them to be advised by me in person and to be able to really have a good understanding of the process. So I think it will be good for us to resume in-person court for criminal cases. All of our, we have a Spanish interpreter available one day a month for people that need Spanish interpreting. It is definitely more effective to have people being interpreted or having cases in person. So people who need the assistance of a Spanish interpreter will come in person. I think to be able to see mannerisms, then you also can have simultaneous interpretation when you're in person, as opposed to on virtual, I have to say something, then the interpreter, then we have the response. And so I think it gets a little bit disjointed. So that's why we've made the decision to switch that way. and I'm excited about it. I haven't really talked to you all much about our juvenile community service program, and so I thought this quarter, since there wasn't a lot to go on, it was a good time to let you know about it. So we have a juvenile program that was created long before I got to Northglenn, because the court had seen a need for juveniles to do community service, because a lot of nonprofit agencies won't allow juveniles to do community service. And so it's a city-run program. Tammy Sutton, our court administrator, supervises Sarah Scari and Eddie Blackwell, the two people that do community service. It's a part-time job. They work on Sundays. A group of kids meet at the Justice Center. And since COVID started, they're walking places from the Justice Center so that they can maintain social distancing. And because there's not as much traditional community service available right now during COVID, because they're trying to stay outside, Sarah and Eddie both have backgrounds in criminal justice and case management. So they do some life skills classes with the kids in the program during community service, talking about making better decisions and what they've been learning from their experience. So I think that's been, it's nice to have that up and running. It's a guaranteed way for kids to get community service done. And then as far as our alternative community service, we're continuing to do that. So in the past, usually courts don't want you working for a nonprofit organization. There's a fear that if you were to do community service for your neighbor, they would do you a favor and just sign off on it. But we've been getting positive feedback for the neighborhood work. Volunteers of America has their Meals on Wheels program, and they focus a lot on our elderly population. They're based out of Denver, but because this population's been so isolated throughout the pandemic, they like greeting cards to go out with their meals. And so people have been doing greeting cards that they can donate or give to Meals on Wheels, and those go out. The prosecutor has expressed an interest in adding more ways to complete community service in our non-traditional way, which would be outside of a nonprofit organization or a church or a school. And so we're in the process on working on that. And then, as no surprise to you guys, Jessica Hulse is just amazing and doing great work. She's continuing to have good success with people that have been struggling in the past. Her caseload is getting pretty small right now because she has been successful with everybody. And so I'm looking for people that would be appropriate for her to supervise and manage their cases and move forward. So that's really what we have going on in court right now. If anybody has questions about the topics that I presented or any other things, I'm happy to address those.
Councilmember Brown?
I just wanted to clarify or make sure I understood you correctly, Judge. You're going to keep on going with the virtual court? Is that your goal for the traffic?
Yes, for traffic for the foreseeable future. I haven't really had any complaints or negative feedback about it. And so I think we'll keep doing virtual, for the foreseeable future.
Is there any tracking being done to make sure that we're getting any fines or penalties paid on a timely basis? Because I know you went into court and then you came out and you paid them.
Right. So we're not tracking any data on that. Tammy sends you all the monthly court update so you can see what's happening with that. You know, a lot of people, I think the people that can pay after court are paying, whether they're coming in. A lot of people say, because we're open, right? The Justice Center is open. So a lot of people say, I'm just going to come in and pay. So I think the people that can pay are paying. The people that can't pay or need a payment plan would be the same, whether we are in person or not.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Of course.
Good to see you again.
It's good to see you too.
Well, thank you for that update. I don't see any other hands or questions or comments. So thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Have a good evening.
Bye. All right, moving into item 3. So we have our Director of Planning and Development. Brooke, you have 2 items tonight, back to back. And so you are here, but I believe you have a guest.
Yes, I have 2. just so you guys don't have to listen to me talk for hours on end, Sarah Doonesbury is here to give the presentation on the comprehensive plan update, and Planning Manager Becky Smith is also here to help answer any questions related to this as well. I'll just quickly say that our objective here is we are reacting to COVID, and this is our approach for how to address COVID with the comp plan, because we had originally come to you with a very robust effort to engage the community. And we have been ruminating on this and going, we can't do what we originally said. So I won't say any more because I don't want to give away Sarah's presentation. So I will stop talking and have her take over. Go ahead, Sarah.
Good evening. I guess, Mayor, put the presentation up.
Yes, I have it. I will just share my screen for you.
Awesome.
Here we go.
Definitely makes sense. Great. So as Brooke mentioned, we are talking about updates to pretty much the entire portion of the comprehensive plan in relation to COVID-19 primarily. So just as a kind of a quick recap, a comprehensive plan, it's a long-range plan that really expresses the community's values, goals, and preferences through policy, programmatic, and land use recommendations. So it's a broad plan to kind of guide the future of the community. And in understanding the future of the community, public input is vital for kind of creating these recommendations. And with that in mind, why we're kind of shifting things. So we do currently have a comprehensive plan. It was updated in 2010, and we're looking to update this one so that we can respond to the changes in the community. It's been 10 years. Things have definitely shifted. The past year is probably going to cause long-term shifts. So really wanting to make sure that we have an understanding of where the community or residents want the city to be in the future. And next slide. So kind of a little bit more of a recap for the process. We did begin these discussions back in 2019. As Brooke said, came at the end of 2019 with a fairly large public engagement program that had to be completely scrapped. And everything was placed on hold due to COVID-19 and the restrictions. So tonight, really looking at discussing those proposed changes to the structure of the plan, and then also an understanding of what we expect those outcomes to be. And then next slide. So quickly, why we want to shift the plan. As I said, public engagement is not safe at the moment, and wanting to, as kind of Rupa alluded to, the kind of moving dial of where the restrictions are, wanting to take that into account for the long-term process of the plan, and knowing that we are able to react and evolve as things have changed. Another kind of benefit of shifting the plan is developing a long-term engagement plan, meaning we're looking at doing sub-area or neighborhood plans once we complete the comprehensive plan to kind of make up for the lack of really robust technical analysis. So really creating specific plans for the kind of various areas of change within the community. And by kind of going from the comp plan into these plans, it creates a kind of a continual engagement model. So residents become really used to engaging with us and really talking about these kind of issues within our city. Next slide. So looking at the proposed plan changes, really kind of twofold, the content and the public engagement. So looking at creating a higher level document that really looks at everything from a citywide kind of higher up level, that really the biggest component is going to be that reduction in the technical analysis. So not necessarily looking at capacity related changes for recommendations, looking more kind of broadly at areas of change, and then that prioritization so that we can, as we move forward, create those sub-area and neighborhood plans once the comprehensive plan is completed. And then on the public engagement side, really using a lot more digital tools. I think over the last year, everyone has definitely gotten more used to having virtual meetings or using virtual tools to communicate with others. So really hoping to kind of latch onto that and move forward. As a big component of this, we're looking at web-based tools for collection of data, ways of informing residents, really kind of making a hub for everything to do with the comp plan. And then because of this kind of shift in engagement, our primary guiding force, is going to be the resident task force. And then the conversation with the residents, with kind of broad residents, is going to need more confirmation based, meaning kind of taking what the resident task force has started to kind of come up with, and then taking it back to the community as a whole to say, are we on the right track? Are you looking, is this what you want? Is this kind of correct? As opposed to that really kind of two-way continual conversation. And then next slide. So with those proposed changes, looking at the outcomes in terms of content, really looking at a broad understanding of the various issues and opportunities within the city. So the things that are helping the city thrive versus the things that are not, and kind of what could be altered or changed for the future. And with that, kind of understanding those, creating those recommendations that target the city as a whole, as opposed to potentially providing specific recommendations for one area, say like marketplace. So it's really policies and recommendations and programs for the entire city. And then prioritization of those recommendations will be, again, taken into sub area and the neighborhood plans. We will be including a future land use plan. It's going to be a little bit more kind of broad use preferences as opposed to very specific, we want this specific type of retail or residential. More, we want broadly this type of commercial or broadly this type of residential. And then making sure that all of the recommendations, pretty much most of the components of the plan, are developed through lenses of equity and resiliency. And I will explain those more later on, but really making sure that everything that's in that plan is going to create a more equitable and resilient future for our residents. And then finally, establishing kind of a work program to be utilized by all departments. With this being a citywide plan, we want to make sure that all departments are involved in the creation of the plan and that it is in line with their work and that they can use it as a guiding document for moving forward in the future. Next slide. So looking at the public engagement, as I mentioned, we're really expecting the primary kind of bulk of engagement to be virtual. Website, town halls over phone, virtual meetings. And because of this, we're expecting a shifted conversation, but not necessarily limited. We are still looking and have strategies that are going to reach or goal of reaching the entire community, making sure that we are getting the voices of those that are always involved, but also the voices that may not always come and talk to us. Since this is a community citywide plan, really wanting to make sure that we try to engage as many residents as possible. And with that, making sure that all of our materials do consider those barriers. So things like language, but also potentially vision or hearing impairments, things of that nature, really kind of taking into account when creating the plan or the kind of tools. And then the web-based tools, again, really vital to reaching residents. We're looking at having surveys and it as an information hub as well. So really is that kind of one-stop shop tool that allows residents to kind of quickly go in and give their input or quickly figure out what's going on. The next kind of thing that we're looking at with our public engagement plan is really implementing a neighborhood champions program, which is looking at utilizing residents within a neighborhood or one resident that acts like a bridge between staff and the community and really making sure there's that trust. They are a trusted person or member of the community. They like engaging. So really using them as a tool to kind of speak to even more people within the community. And then, as I said, the public engagement is also going to be within and making sure that we involve departments from start to finish. And then kind of knowing and saying all of this, everything is subject to change and evolve based on where we're at with COVID restrictions. Hopefully evolving to being open up and be more in person, but also again, evolving based on the type of input we're receiving. So if a tool seems to be not really working, let's look at something different so that we are spending our time efficiently gathering information. And then if one happens to be working well, let's continue using it. So really just understanding and evaluating as we go through. So next slide. So the changes and outcomes, this is kind of what we expect them to kind of lead to for the final plan to look like, or the outline. So looking at basic introduction, talking about a history of the community, as well as an explanation of the various lenses and how they are going to work within this process. Then going on to the kind of broad issues and opportunities within the community, what's not working, what is working, are there tools that will help improve the community? And those are most likely going to be subject or topic-based kind of way of organizing them. And then from there, kind of taking that information and starting to create that community vision. So what are those kind of broad goals and policies that the residents are looking for in the future? Kind of what does the future of Northglenn have as a goal? What does it look like? And then again, continuing to the future land use plan, which is going to be broadly based on our zoning districts. Since we updated the UDO, there are actually a few zoning districts that have not really been utilized, primarily mixed use. So really starting to look at how those districts can start to play a role in that future land use plan. And then also looking at potentially an equity-based map to kind of help with visualizing that prioritization of those sub-area and neighborhood plans. So it's a tool kind of to help move forward. And then finally, work program, which is really the kind of actionable items that come out of those goals and policies. So what are the kind of recommendations that get us to achieving those goals and policies? And then of course, those are created using the lenses of equity and resiliency. And then next slide, and I believe this is going to kind of get into a few more specifics. So equity lens. Equity in the past year has definitely become a very important topic and something that definitely warrants understanding. So looking at kind of the history side of things, really want to understand where has Northglenn been successful in terms of equity? What kind of components or practices within the city are equitable, but also wanting to understand what issues might arise or kind of exist. So understanding, not necessarily going through every single policy that we've made in the last 50 years, but understanding kind of broadly what systemic issues exist within local governments and seeing how we do or do not kind of fall within those categories. And then in the realm of kind of guiding that determination of issues and opportunities, understanding that if something is less equitable, it's harming or holding back a portion of the community, understanding that as an issue, and then understanding opportunities with, is this helping all of the community thrive? Is it something that is beneficial? And kind of understanding and noting that within that process. And then with the community vision, really looking at utilizing an equity toolkit, whether it is GARE kind of outline one, or I believe the DICE board right now is also working on an equity toolkit, whether it's not maybe utilizing that one and kind of having this plan act as almost that pilot project to start to look at how we can use those toolkits to make those decisions. And then the future land use plan, again, equity is going to come in with that prioritization and understanding of need. And then the work program, again, very similar to the community vision and making sure that every recommendation is equitable and is not going to harm or hold back a portion of our residents. And next slide. So the resiliency lens is really kind of made up of three different components of health, environment, economy. And primarily it's looking at a community's really kind of capacity to recover or bounce back quickly. So for example, economy is, what is our resiliency looking like after the effects of COVID-19 on our economy? That's kind of an example. And really making sure that every recommendation that we're creating is going to take into account the resiliency, and is it promoting that resiliency within the community and making sure that our residents have the tools and capacity to handle, say, things with like the environment as we continue to get more high extreme heat days and droughts. What are those recommendations that we can make sure that our residents are going to be more resilient and be able to handle those changes more safely? And a really important component of this and of the plan is just understanding how this affects quality of life, and that understanding resiliency and the importance of this lens to make sure that we are providing the best quality of life for our residents. Next slide. So those subject areas that I mentioned that I included in the issues and opportunities and to consent to goals, there's very standard topic areas that tend to be included in comprehensive plans: transportation, housing, etc. This is not an exhaustive list. It is definitely subject to change based on input from residents. Definitely will add topics if needed. The only absolutely required topic is parks and tourism. That's actually the only component that I could find of a comprehensive plan in Colorado that is required by state statute. So that will definitely be in there. Next slide. So getting into kind of the public engagement and process of this, we are looking at a 12 to 18 month timeline, which is shorter than what was previously discussed because the plan isn't going to be as robust. Really looking at how the different kind of components start to overlap. So resident task force and the departmental stakeholder meetings will be happening throughout the entire process. There are check-in points, the kickoff, the midway, and the final. Hopefully the midway and the final could be in-person open houses depending on how safe things are. And then once we have started to gain some information, starting to bring in various events, focus group meetings, the Neighborhood Champions program, and then also our regional partner meetings so they can help us to start to kind of inform our decisions and then also allow us to kind of tell them ours and see how it starts to affect regionally, kind of that two-way street. Next slide. So broadly looking at kind of the specific tools and their impact on decisions, we are starting with telephone town hall participants. It's a citywide way to kind of kick off the plan, let them know what's going on. It is a consult level of decision, so we will be gathering some feedback, but it's kind of broadly based on the components of the plan and kind of the broad direction. And then the connection, the mailing, social media, anything kind of included in that component, again, citywide, but it's more on the informed side. So it's just keeping them up to date as to what's happening and being transparent about the process. The website or web-based tools really probably could be inform and consult, since there is that survey component to it, but there's also the informative. And then the resident task force and the departmental stakeholders are really probably have the most impact on decisions outside of the Planning Commission and Council's kind of final adoption of the plan. So collaborating is really about using kind of partnering with those residents and the various groups to kind of determine those areas of need and start to develop the strategies or alternatives to address those. And then next slide. Oh, sorry, actually regional stakeholders involve kind of a mid-range of impact, which is regular, and it's looking more at kind of the consideration of concerns and ideas as opposed to that specific minutia. And then next slide, sorry about that. Our community events, citywide, looking at consult level for both community events and pocket park. Community events, we're looking at potentially kind of latching on to the events that are already scheduled that residents know about, to be able to have kind of quick conversations, engagement with those residents. And then the pocket park events are really about creating events that are just centered around the comprehensive plan and making sure that residents know kind of the importance of it and specificity. So it's definitely going to include things like food trucks or incentives like giveaways to really draw people out, because unfortunately the topic of a comprehensive plan may not be exciting enough. So making sure that those events happen across parks so that we can reach multiple areas of the community. And those are both looking at that kind of consult level of impact, which again is that kind of feedback on the various directions and components of the plan, but not necessarily the really distinct details. And then the last three are all involved, and it's the focus groups, which are specific demographics, which could be parents with young children, and what do they need in the city, or what do they want? And then, or topic-based, say someone's very interested in transportation, it allows them an avenue to kind of really specifically talk about that topic and get into it. And then the neighborhood champions, again, we're looking at about 10 residents to make sure that we hit all areas of the city. And then in order to kind of make sure that we are in line with our various kind of communities, boards and commissions and groups, looking at engaging all of those groups, things like NURA, the Diversity Board, Historic Preservation Commission, all of those at the kind of involved level, that mid-level of impact on ideas, not necessarily the specifics. So next slide. Going into a little bit more detail for the resident task force, we are looking at about 15 to 20 residents to meet on a monthly basis, to start with at least, and looking at using an application process so we can determine best fits, but also to start to kind of ensure that it's a diverse group that represents the entire community. So really making sure there's diversity within race and ethnicity, potentially socioeconomic status, where they live in the city, gender, age, profession, all of those kind of components, making sure that this task force looks as close as possible to the city, essentially. We are looking at based on kind of time and the temporary nature of the group to not necessarily do the appointment through council. But of course that can be discussed and shifted. So next slide. So for the web-based tools, really it's a platform to inform our residents and communicate. So really inform them on the various events, the purpose of the comp plan, what's been going on, where we're at, kind of summaries of meetings, but also provide them with the kind of resources and plans and the data that we're using, including those sources so they're aware and everything is very transparent. And then on the communication side, it's a place to house surveys to really kind of quickly ask them questions, but also have interactive maps where they can go in and say point out areas that they do or don't like, aspects of the city that are important to them. And then also potentially kind of open-ended questions, and then just kind of a comment section where if they have questions for us or want to give us information, they can. And one of the kind of big components of these tools and kind of the data collection side of things is the kind of back-end functions that allow us to kind of collate and now analyze the data as efficiently and effective as possible, so that we can make sure that it's applied well and easily to the plan. And then once we're kind of through this process, looking at utilizing more tools for the housing of the final plan and really providing kind of a dashboard with updates of those recommendations. And Mayor, there is an example link if you would like to click on that kind of shows what we're talking about. So this is a comprehensive plan for Plano, Texas, and really they're utilizing this kind of dashboard function. Specifically right now, it's the quality of life goal and policy of active living and citizen well-being. They have then taken all of the actions that are related to that process and are keeping residents informed of, has it been started yet? Is it in progress? There are some that say that it's been fully completed. Along the side, they're still asking questions if this is important. So making sure that if things have shifted, they're aware. And then the final is those supporting materials and resources. Are there existing plans that could relate to these topics? Are there resources within the city that are related to these topics? Making sure that they're included and can be easily reached through this process. So that's kind of understanding of what we're thinking about for the final kind of housing of the plan. One more, yes. So the Neighborhood Champions program is we're really looking at utilizing residents within their neighborhoods that are involved in their neighborhoods, that are kind of really part of that community, engage with their neighbors, and really can help be that bridge to the various neighborhoods between staff and residents to help build that trust, to have that kind of person there that helps to kind of guide the process and really making sure, again, we're looking at about 10 to make sure we get various areas of the community. And they're going to be responsible for some very specific tasks of, again, kind of being a cheerleader for the comp plan, informing residents of the opportunities, making sure that they know what's going on, but also engaging with their neighbors and really discussing the plan. and kind of providing that feedback to us. Sometimes residents don't necessarily have the time, or they're not comfortable coming to large meetings or discussing over virtual. This could be just a quick discussion with their neighbor that they trust, that they talk to all the time about this plan, and we can then get that feedback. And then, of course, also when we're going in, say, the pocket park events, going into these kind of neighborhoods, having them there to assist with establishing those relationships and building that trust. And since there's definitely very specific tasks that are going to probably happen outside of kind of normal work hours, weekends, evenings, we are looking at compensating our neighborhood champions for their time, which we'll discuss when we get to the budget. So next slide. So the budget. We are looking at utilizing the telephone town halls, looking at the 3 of them. The one downside of telephone town halls is they only automatically reach out to landlines, but there is an opt-in option for those with cell phones. So we will make sure that that is clearly advertised and available when using this tool. Looking at, if we do 3 of them, about 12,000. And then for the postcard mailings, again, kind of that beginning, mid, end of talking about the kind of town hall or open house meetings, making sure that we get that information directly into the hands of our residents. With 3 of those is about 16,500. The neighborhood champions, 10 residents, we're looking at about $500 to kind of compensate them for their time and making sure that they've kind of completed the tasks we need. It is a limited of scope, couple months, 3 months within the time of the plan, so it's not the entirety of the kind of planning process. And then the last 3 are all very dependent on each other. So looking at event incentives and printed materials, the food trucks, the giveaways, boards that we may want to bring out and talk about with the public events. Going to be dependent on kind of the remainder, looking at estimating about 10,000 right now. And then I'm just going to jump down to the miscellaneous, which could just be if we need to do an extra mailing, or we can do things in person, so we may need to do childcare. What's the cost in that? And that's, again, going to be really dependent and variable based on the web-based tools. So the web-based tool is looking at both the outreach function and the final dashboard. We have it set at a range of 25,000 to 50,000, which we understand is quite high. It's a high estimate. The 25 kind of starting mark was based off of we did receive one proposal when we initially put out the RFP for the plan that had the website component at about 25,000, but that was just for the final plan and dashboard. So double that, understanding that there's kind of 2 websites involved. Having kind of looked at and researching the various software options out there, though, we are looking at just utilizing tools that may involve purchasing of licenses. So we are expecting that to be a much lower number than 50, but wanting to kind of have that understanding of what it could be high range, just to make sure that we have it all budgeted. It's easier to have extra money than to run out. So wanting to kind of keep that in mind. And then the total, our total budget for the plan is 100,000. So really making sure everything works within that. And I think that is the last slide. So if anyone has any questions, that was a lot of information.
And Mayor, I just want to also just jump in real quick, is that when we originally put the original budget together, it was over 200. And that was in part because we were going to help outsource the existing conditions information that Sarah and Becky have been putting together and working with the Planning Commission on. So the amount that we are now moving forward with is really a reduced in the original scope pre-COVID, and that this is what we're looking to do in terms of how we utilize it for engagement.
Okay. Councilmember Goff.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a couple of things I wanted to at least comment on. You're talking about a task force that is going to be representative of different groups in the community. And I just want to say or point out that the task, well, it wasn't called that, but the group of citizens that you got together for receiving input for the new rec center, theater, senior center, seemed like that. I mean, I don't know if that's the model you're going to use, but I remember being in those meetings and there were parents and there were, teens and there were seniors and business people from the community. And I thought that worked out really well. So I think that's a fabulous idea, and I hope that it's just as successful as that one was. Then the other thing I wanted to comment on is you've mentioned a couple of times in here land use and even I would include the economic development. And I just wanted to, I don't know, sound you out or maybe get a little more explanation on, I know in other areas in the city when we've talked about doing some kinds of development and, maybe we had citizens requests for certain kind of housing, say affordable housing, for example. It seems like a lot of that is so dependent on finding a developer willing to do that. Are we still going to be limited that same way? Are we going to be able to offer some incentives? Are we, what could we expect?
Right. So the kind of understanding out of the comprehensive plan is not necessarily going to be incredibly specific as to what's going on in each area, but say Marketplace is noted as an area of change. The sub-area plan or the kind of master plan is really where we can start to get into what residents want. And that can be used as a tool similar to the civic campus of saying this is kind of what we're wanting, or even Carl's Farm, a tool to kind of show the developers. Incentives we do have in place as just through our economic development department. They are not necessarily going to be kind of new ones created, I don't believe, out of the plans. But the benefit of those kind of master plans is to understand what the community wants and then be able to promote that to developers to get more in line with what we're wanting or the community wants.
Okay, I guess that's the clarification I wanted. Thank you.
There are a lot of hands and a lot of you went simultaneously, so please know that I see you. Councilmember Brown is next.
Thank you for your report. That was great. I do want to throw something out there. And the compensation for being on this committee, if we don't compensate any of our other boards and commissions, because those people actually don't just go to that meeting and then not do anything for a month or for 2 weeks or for 3 weeks or whatever. How can we compensate this group and not any of our other boards or commissions? Even though it's like a 3-month thing or whatever, there's not that I know of, maybe Meredith or Heather do, but we don't compensate residents for participation.
So the kind of compensation portion that we put in there is really in response to the kind of initiative that they're going to have to take to engage with their neighbors, kind of the completion of the specific tasks, providing us that information back, taking the information that we want to their resident and kind of having that continual conversation. So within that small chunk of time, the amount of work is expected to be higher than what a long-term board. But Becky or Brooke, you have any other kind of thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would just clarify that the neighborhood champions are not the task force, the resident task force that'll meet on a monthly basis. The neighborhood champions are really people that we see knocking on their neighbors' doors, reaching out to people, facilitating events at the Pocket Park, comp plan meetings that we have and whatnot. So we really see them more as like some of our boots on the ground than a task force member.
Yeah, I think another way to describe them is like an omnibudsman for the area neighborhoods. Also for Planning Commission, we do compensate the Planning Commission for their participation.
That's interesting. I have a problem with that, but I'll save it for another time. I don't want to take up everybody's time. I just don't understand why people on other boards, but I'll save that for another time. I don't want to take up all your time here. Thank you.
Councilmember Escobar.
Thank you, Sarah. That was an excellent presentation. Very impressed. I didn't see, and maybe I overlooked the fact that schools were not included. Our high school students, particularly at Northglenn, are so eager to do work for the city and contribute to making our city better I'd like to see that on there if it isn't in there. Other than that, very, very good presentation. Very impressed.
Thank you. We are definitely planning on involving youth. It definitely wasn't called out specifically, but taking advantage of the Youth Commission and maybe within the realm of focus groups as well, to really make sure that we get their perspective as well, because they definitely are important residents of the city. And then kind of broadly speaking, the regional stakeholders, we're looking at the school board to get that kind of higher level understanding.
Councilmember Duran Malika.
Awesome, great. So I had actually I had an idea for the outreach. One of the things that I think COVID taught us is to be innovative and really just have a lot of things on demand, it seems like, to get public input. One of the great projects that I've seen so far was actually with the 270 expansion project that they've been working on. What they did is for public input, they, instead of having like a meeting, like a Zoom meeting like this, where someone's talking or whatever, they actually set up like a virtual like town hall, if you will. Like if you were like entering into like a large room and there's different like stations and you could learn about different things throughout the group, and folks could like interact with each individual station and make comments and put things on maps and things like that. I don't know, that was really successful. And I think having kind of like a virtual feedback hall, if you will, I don't know what else to call it, would be great to get people's input over time, you know, especially if you can't make any of the events or maybe you forgot and you're like, oh, here's a link, I'm going to go to this room, I'm going to learn about all of this cool stuff and be able to leave feedback and comments on specific boards. I think that would be that was just a really cool idea. And I love that they did that. And my second question is actually kind of along the lines with Antonio, is where do like the business and nonprofit groups kind of fit in to this process? Like, do we have business involvement? Do we have, you know, some of our local nonprofits kind of getting involved and sharing their input? How does that work?
Yeah, so they are kind of broadly be included in the stakeholder group. So looking at a more specific stakeholder groups, they may not be meeting on a monthly basis, but making sure that we do bring in that kind of technical analysis or understanding of businesses within the community, those nonprofits that we work with, falls within that stakeholder and even regional kind of partners. They may not, and we can definitely do this kind of specifically call that out, but they're definitely have been contemplated.
Okay, great. Thank you. Just want to make sure they're included too. Thanks.
Mayor Pro Tem Wolford.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. First off, Sarah, fantastic job. I love all of the ways that you all have kind of adapted and adjusted to just the changing realities that we're dealing with COVID. I think that your approach is really thorough and thoughtful. I'm in particular really excited about the neighborhood champions. I think it's such a different approach than I've seen out of some of the different projects that, you know, staff across the city are working on. And I'm really excited to see, you know, if it can almost be a pilot for other things that we do as a city. When it comes to the compensation, that makes total sense to me that we would have a small group of folks that we're compensating. And what I'm hoping in particular is that, you know, some of the folks that may really want to be involved but can't commit in a long-term way, right? For a 2-year term, a 4-year term, and maybe folks that want to get involved but financially like have to prioritize other things. I'm hoping that this will remove some barriers for them so that we really are getting a full conversation from our entire group of residents in Northglenn. So I just props to you guys for being willing to give this a try. I think it's really neat. And I guess the other question I had is, I remember, let's see, when you all came to us, I don't think it was last fall, everything's kind of a blurred together. But the last time that we talked about the comp plan, there was some sort of idea around doing a meeting in a box. And I fully admit I was a little skeptical about it at first. I was like, how are you going to do this? But I'm just wondering, are you all thinking about, you know, still using the meeting in a box as a tool for some of the community champions to be hosting these conversations? I mean, I saw Denver's Climate Action Task Force used the meeting in a box activity, and I got to see one play out, and it was just such a fascinating sort of conversation and real, like, very honest feedback that was provided that I feel like is really useful. And so I'm just wondering if you're thinking about using that tool at all moving forward with some of the community champions. And if you haven't given it thought, that's cool too.
Yeah, so we initially kind of moved away from the meeting in the box because of the COVID restrictions and not wanting people to necessarily gather together in each other's home. But that kind of provision of questions or kind of topics is something that we can definitely, and I think are looking at providing our neighborhood champions so that they can have that facilitation and those conversations. It's just not going to be as structured as like the specific meeting in a box, but that kind of component is what we're looking at for our neighborhood champions to take on.
Cool. That sounds like it'll be a lot of fun. And to Councilmember Escobar's point, I know that the high school is always looking for PBL, the problem-based learning topics to take on. So maybe it might be, maybe this comprehensive plan is something that you all could work with Adams 12 and see if you could get calendared for next year. Because as I shared in our last meeting, I recently participated in a PBL and heard all about some of our students' ideas and solutions for addressing homelessness in our community. And I was just really struck by how deep our students understand what's going on in our community and just how, just how helpful their perspectives were. I think we could probably gain a lot from hearing what they have to say there too. And then the last question I had was, I saw a piece in there around, I think, natural resources. Are you thinking that natural resources is sort of the place where you're having conversations about climate planning, climate resiliency? Like, is that where it's going to be included, or is there a separate section that we're really drawing out the climate action piece?
Yeah, so looking at it a little bit more as kind of including the kind of climate and sustainability measures within each component. But if we're finding that residents really want that as a really kind of topic that has a lot of specificity, we can pull that out and make it its own. The kind of natural and cultural resources is more our parks, kind of like what are the natural elements or kind of environmental things that are important within the city. Understanding that climate does affect those. So looking at it more as kind of including it in all the topics, or depending on how residents want its own.
Okay, sounds like there's a lot of flexibility there. So cool. All right, thank you all so much.
Any other comments or questions for Sarah or Brooke? No, I don't have anything to add that hasn't already been asked and complimented. So thank you for your work on that. I really appreciate it. I am wondering, since it came up, Heather, if you're maybe going to put on the agenda, it might be interesting to know which of our boards and commissions have some sort of compensation and which don't, and just to open that dialogue.
So that would simply, just checking in to make sure I understand the exercise, to provide council with information on who's compensated and why and the history behind it. I'll work with Joanna on that. And then if council, now, do you want us to go a step further and look at other cities and what they do, or just stick with here's what we do?
I don't know, council, what do you think? I'd like to know what we do, since it didn't seem to be common knowledge. Does anyone want to know what other cities do?
Mayor, I think that would be a good idea. Since we're looking at what we are doing, I think also the next step or question would be is, what are the other cities doing? And we can compare and decide what we want to do.
Okay. Do you want to do size like, or Adams County, or a combination?
About whatever we can do. Combination is fine.
Okay. Is that good, Heather?
Yep, that works. Awesome.
Thank you.
Future agendas. Thanks.
Awesome. I appreciate it. All right, Brooke, you are still here. Do you want to present the whole thing or just your heated maps?
So what I was going to suggest is the reason why I'm actually in the office is that if you try to open up the heat map while also live streaming, the heat map will take forever to load. So that's why I'm here. So when we get to that slide, I will ask just to share my screen, and I'll load the heat maps because it loads really fast here at the office because of our bandwidth. So
that's great. No worries. No worries. All right. Here we are, neighborhood services.
All right. Well, good evening, everybody. And before I jump into the slide deck, I just kind of want to mention very quickly that this is step 2 of a 3-step process. And for the public and for the recording of the meeting, we started out with presenting to council an approach to this conversation about level of service for neighborhood services, with the idea that we would hold one-on-one interviews with council members, consolidate that information, share it to you, and then lay out next steps, and then bring those next steps to you in a follow-up meeting. So tonight's meeting is that mid step, which is present the findings, as well as provide some context to the history, and also give you some stats for what you guys shared with us, and kind of give you an opportunity to reflect on that and what your individual thoughts were with regards to level of service, and how that relates back to the data that we'll share tonight. So with that, the other thing I'm also going to offer up to the council, and I'll defer to the mayor on how best to handle this, but I'm also happy to pause on slides and answer questions through the presentation, because we will be going through different aspects of the conversation, and I don't want people necessarily to lose their talking point or their question, because we are going to cover some territory tonight. So I will defer to the mayor and how best you would like to do that.
Okay, well, just a note for council, I have the ability to see the full grid. So if you raise your hand while Brooke is presenting, I will pause him and open it up for questions.
Yeah, just hit me on mute, and that way we know I'm
okay.
All right, so let's go ahead and get going here. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about the history of code enforcement, and some of this will actually predate myself. We'll talk about the current process of how we administer and handle code enforcement cases. And then we'll jump into 2019 stats. And we did not do 2020 because actually code enforcement was not considered emergency essential personnel. And we did not actually have code in the field for about 2 months. And upon return, there were certain things that we weren't actively enforcing, like abandoned vehicles and expired plates, because people weren't able to renew their tags and whatnot because DMV was closed for an extended period of time. So we took 2019 data to share that, and then we'll get into council feedback. And as part of that council feedback, we'll then share some of the input that you guys provided as far as what next steps might look like. And our goal at the end of this conversation is to kind of get a consensus of where the council is as a group on moving forward with next steps. Okay, so for those who've been on council for a while, none of this is going to sound new. For those who are new, this may sound a little, this will be new information for you. So early on, before my time, one of the council, previous council objectives was to beautify Northglenn through code enforcement. However, it was trying to be even-handed. We didn't want to be forceful, but we wanted to get results. One of the programs that was implemented before I started in Northglenn was a program called Operation Clean Sweep, where code enforcement staff actually walked every street of the city and wrote up every single violation they possibly could, with the expectation that we were going to try to turn around the appearance of Northglenn and create a beautiful community. Also, before my time, we had actually twice the number of staff that we have now, and we had about the same number of results in terms of caseload. We also had very poorly defined policy and procedures in which over the last 10 years, we have been constantly updating and modifying them so that we are meeting what we believe are council expectations for service. The other historical thing that we've also corrected and addressed is we used to have an extremely protracted enforcement process, and I actually wanted to include it as a slide, The only problem is that it's so broad on a single deck, you virtually can't read all the flowchart boxes because of the number of steps. It would effectively take almost 10 to 15 steps before we would issue a summons to somebody because of the previous processes, which really was this effort of let's apply force and let's try to get results, but let's also not be too forceful. So it didn't work. And we changed that. And we're going to actually I'll spend a few minutes on our current process and kind of explain how more optimized we've approached that specific issue. We also had code enforcement actively has about 130 policies in the books that we enforce. And ironically, when I got here, we had them all over the municipal code. They were in the land use code, they were in other property maintenance sections. And what we've tried to do is consolidate all of those policies into one chapter or fewer chapters than what we have now, so as to know and be able to administer more efficiently. One of the other things historically that used to happen is that we used to actually self-perform our own abatements. Staff did them. We did not contract them out. So if somebody had trash in the backyard and we had to load 2 dumpsters, it was staff that was doing that. One of the things that was challenging is that we would actually get a rule to abate a property, and then we would go back out and do continuous abatement on the same order when we didn't really legally have that authorization. And yet that was one of the expectations that we had historically when I first arrived here. So we've corrected that. Next slide, please. So a little bit more, as part of this forceful and get results, we issued virtually no summonses into court. We used to issue what were known as citations, which were punitive fines that started out at, I believe, 100, 250, and then up to 1,000 for a third citation. And we were not getting results with this process. We also had an administrative hearing officer to appeal citations, which was a magistrate that would come in and effectively perform the same exercise as what the judge now does for summonses that we issue into court. Another thing that we also did as code enforcement is that we actually self-performed not only abatements, but graffiti removal. Graffiti removal has been reassigned over to Public Works and Parks, and they do an amazing job of getting graffiti moved much faster than we were previously capable of doing. Historically, and this is during my tenure, when we didn't have twice the amount of staff, but the current level of staff that we now have, less one. We used to have 1 officer per ward, and then we had 1 officer that did nothing but commercial properties. When in the previous years, we moved away from that, and we actually started equally distributing the 5 officers based on case and service area. And now and I'll touch a little bit more on this, but we're now back to 4 officers per ward. Also, in the past, officers were not allowed radios or protective equipment except for bulletproof vests. And before they came over to planning, which was a couple years before I started here, they were in the police department. And there was a negative connotation to the code enforcement staff that they looked paramilitary. And so when we took away the radios and the other protective equipment such as mace and asp, we had them in royal blue t-shirts, polo shirts, and khaki pants, which I think was really trying to make them more approachable, but yet didn't necessarily make them appear assertive or in a manner in which they're trying to address difficult and challenging situations. Next slide. And before I touch on this slide, are there any comments or questions about the historical context or the historical past that any council members would like to ask or expand on?
I don't see any hands.
Okay, great. So this is our current enforcement process, and I also included this as an attachment to your packet, so that I knew that this wouldn't necessarily read very well in a virtual setting. So I actually provided a better version for you to be able to see, because in the slide deck, it's not as clear a font. But basically what we do today is if we get a complaint or if we do a proactive, we call it a new case. And there's two steps to that. We either find that there is no violation or there is a violation. And what we do is we issue a notice of violation. And this is a courtesy notice to say, hey, you have something on your property that needs to be addressed. So what happens after we issue this notice? And typically what this is, it's a posting on the door. All of our officers are trained to make initial public contact when issuing a notice of violation. We try to contact not only if it's a renter occupied, we also attempt to contact the property owner as well. Typically our enforcement provisions have certain timelines. Some of them are 24 hours, others are 7, and yet others are also 30. So on all of these, we try to make contact with them the day of. If we don't, we give them an opportunity to reach out to us. If at the end of whatever time period is prescribed on the notice, we will follow up with them and see where they're at. If they've complied it, we close the case. If they haven't complied it, we will speak with them and determine whether or not they're making any efforts for compliance and grant them an extension. If at the end of an extension, so for instance, if I come to you and I say, you have 7 days to clean up something, and at day 7 or 8, you haven't complied, but you're making effort, the officer has the administrative discretion to grant an extension for another 7 days. If the officer comes back out at the end of that 7 days and still things aren't complied, but the person is making a valiant effort to try to get it complied, they can then go to the supervisor and ask the supervisor for a second extension. The officer is not authorized to grant a second extension, only the supervisor. The supervisor will review the case and then say and determine whether or not a summons should be issued or to grant a second extension. So then the same exercise goes to the end where they've either complied, and if they haven't, then we issue a summons and we hand it over to the court. And the idea here is that when we hand it over to the court, we have done everything we can within a reasonable time frame to be as accommodating to those who may be having challenges complying. And then we say to ourselves, this has gone to a point where we need to defer this to the court and allow the court to prescribe a reasonable time frame for them to determine how to solve and comply the property. So that is typically what happens when we make contact. Let's say we have a vacant home or an absentee property owner. We actually, and this will be elaborated a little bit more in the following slides, but we've actually adopted new policy to address vacant homeowners. And a lot of this was really an outcome during the Great Recession and the subprime situation where we had so many foreclosed properties, and we were unsuccessful in getting properties cleaned up and maintained because banks were letting yards deteriorate, and this was a big challenge for us. So we actually have a separate process that also attempts to get reasonable compliance from folks when it comes to vacant properties. Typically, we have 4 cause hearings, which basically says we've exhausted all reasonable efforts to contact a property owner, an absentee property owner, and then go to the judge and ask for permission to go and abate the property. The other options we have is that we can also issue them citations, which is something else that we do. So with that, I will pause and see if anybody has any questions about our current process.
I don't see any.
Great. Okay. Next slide.
Oh, Councilmember Goff.
Yeah.
Sorry. Since this is something I'm a little bit unfamiliar with in the terms of the process, when the city goes in to abate the problem, does there turn out to be some kind of a fee or fine, or the homeowner ends up having to pay for the city having to come in to do that?
The answer to all of those are yes, yes, and yes. They may be varying degrees. So if we have to go in and say remove a dead tree, we will hire a third-party contractor who will provide us an estimate. We will then go to the property owner and inform them of the estimate, and also inform them that if they do not pay for it, we will lien the property, and then they will have to, that's how they will be obligated to pay that. In some cases, and this is at the judge's discretion, depending on the circumstances of the case, the judge may also issue fines based on her findings of the case and why it is before her. So, but that's it varies. It depends on the circumstances.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Duran Malika.
Quick question, Brooke. What are some of the timeframes associated with this process? So, like, how long is the extension for, and then, or like, how long does abatement, like, how? So, if you have a really distressed property, how long is it sitting around going through this process?
Okay, so let's take minimum landscaping. Okay, let's just say someone's yard needs to be re-landscaped. It's 75% is weeds. So typically, you under our code, you have 30 days from the date of the notice to re-landscape your yard. One of the things that we do is that we have a proactive approach for minimum landscape requirements in the spring, so as to give everybody an ample opportunity to get it done in the growth season, as opposed to going out and running people up in, say, September, October, November, when it's winter and you can't reestablish a yard. So you have 30 days, and at day 30, the officer comes out to you and says, well, it looks like you've got the yard torn up, but you haven't laid down the seed. And he says, well, we're working on it and we hope to have this done in the next 30 days. Can you grant us an extension? We can say yes to that. So in that instance, it could take 60 up to 90 days, depending upon if the supervisor believes that they're making a reasonable effort. If we get to 30 days and the homeowner goes, yeah, I ain't got to it yet, I don't know when I'm going to, the officer then is likely going to issue a summons, and then that summons will go into court, and then the judge will then set a court date, and then the judge will hear the case and then prescribe a compliance time frame for that particular property owner. In those cases, that's landscaping and dead trees are some of the more expensive and time intensive efforts. They can take anywhere from 30 to 90 days on any given case. If it's a 7-day violation where you have 7 days to like mow your grass, person can ask for an extension. Typically, if you haven't mowed your grass after 14 days, we're probably going to write you a ticket for that, because you should be able to get it mowed within that time frame. But that's, once again, it's discretionary for the officers on that.
Okay.
All right. So as I was alluding to in the previous slide, these are four of the biggest things that we've done in the last 5-6 years to really work through and improve our service delivery when it comes to code enforcement. We've optimized language and eliminated inconsistencies and actually direct conflicts in the code. That's an ongoing process. We continue to improve that, and that's why you will occasionally see amendments. And I think the last one we brought for you was special mobile vehicles, which is basically trailers and other apparatus and devices that we deem are not appropriate in residential areas. We've approved the abatement procedures with 4 cause hearings, and that's where we talk about absentee property owners, chronic violators. So if you have a certain number of violations within a given time frame, you automatically just get issued a summons. We don't issue you a 7-day notice. You just get a ticket into court because you're a chronic violator and you're a repeat offender. And what we're doing and trying to work with you doesn't appear to be working. And it's one of these things where we feel it's more appropriate for the judge to handle those cases because we get better and more direct results, rather than, as I was alluding to, giving them an extension or giving them extra time. If they're not performing and they're repeating the same violations, we will just send it to the judge. Also, and the last thing I believe we brought to council last year was expediting the court process through decriminalizing nuisances. And what this does is it avoids complaint or violators of requesting trials for their violations. And one of the things that you may recall with Mr. Sid's and the storage yard is that the gentleman was given multiple extensions and then failed to comply, We then took it through the court process. He requested extensions with the court before then requesting a trial, and really used the system as hard as he could to drag out the process as long as he could. And this decriminalizing nuisances was focused on these type of cases so as to avoid a protracted process. Any questions with anything on this slide, please? Okie doke. All right, so now I'm going to jump into some stats for Northglenn. And one of the things that we did is that we surveyed 14 cities to kind of get a sense of where do we sit in the realm of code enforcement on some statistical references. So we looked at coverage per square mile as one of the best ways to sort of quantify this. And you will see in the next slide that not all communities track code enforcement as rigorously as others, and that's kind of why you're going to see some different numbers here. But for coverage per square mile, with the 4 code officers that we have one officer for every 1.6 square miles. And I do want to caveat, I did not calculate section 36 into that math, just Northglenn proper. We have 1 resident up in section 36, and we've actually only ever had 1 violation in section 36, and that was from the county when we stopped using the dirt up there for agricultural purposes and we started getting weeds. And so we had to go in there and spray herbicide for that. Pre-COVID, when we had 5 officers, we were doing 1.2, we were 1 person per every 1.2 square miles in Northglenn. When we surveyed 14 surrounding communities, the average calculated out to 1 officer per 7.2 square miles. These communities were everyone from Aurora, Westminster, Thornton, Louisville, Commerce City, Lafayette. I have the list if anyone's interested in seeing it. Also, we looked at who was next closest to us, and Wheat Ridge was the next closest with 1 officer per 3.3, Louisville 1 per 4, and Thornton 1 per 4.5. So any questions on this slide? All right, so how do we rank in terms of cases per square mile? Well, Northglenn actually ranks the highest cases per square mile of 8 cities that we surveyed, and that's because the other 6 don't even track this data for their communities. It's not even a statistically significant issue for them. But Wheat Ridge was the next closest with 291 cases per square mile. The average of the 8 cities that did provide us data was 203 cases per square mile. Next slide. All right, so this is a breakdown of 2019. And as a general rule, our officers average between 500 and 650 cases per year. And I do want to mention one thing is that there's a difference between cases and violations. A single property could actually have multiple violations, but only 1 case. So in 2019, we had 2,700 cases. 25 were referred by council, 17 by the city manager. Our voluntary compliance was 98.5%. And non-voluntary, which essentially equates to summonses, was 70. So we issued 70 summonses in 2019 that went to the court. When we look at proactive versus complaint-based, we do 70% of our casework by the officers is proactive and 30% is complaint-based. Any questions on that?
Councilmember Goff?
Thank you. So when you say proactive, is that where the officers, I know you said in the past they might have walked every foot of the city, but they're just like going through the city and they spot something and then they stop and just inform the resident?
That is correct.
Okay.
That is correct. So our officers are, as a general rule, during the summer months, the officers work 410s. They come in at 6:30. They are out in the field by 7 o'clock on most days, and they stay out in the field until about 2:30, 3 o'clock. And they are out there either doing follow-ups on open cases or they're doing proactive work. All right. So Mayor, if I can share, I will attempt to do my best here, and we'll see what happens. Did anybody get a chance to actually try this? Okay. That's not what I shared. Let me try this again. Are you guys seeing that now?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yes, okay. So I'm gonna load the 5-year, and bear with me here for a moment. So this is the 5-year from 2019 back to 2015 for all properties in Northglenn that have received at least 2 cases in a 5-year time frame. So I'm going to zoom in. And once again, this is
Brooke, I'm not seeing a map.
You're not seeing it?
No, all I'm seeing is the Northglenn webpage that says code enforcement maps.
All right, here we go. Can you see this?
Nothing. There we go. There we go.
Yeah,
there we go.
I will reload this one more time. So this reflects any property in Northglenn that's had 2 or more cases in a 5-year period.
Sorry.
So I'm going to jump back to the 3-year just because it's a little easier to sort of demonstrate how this map works. And you guys have this is a live link in your slide deck that you guys can go ahead and take a look at and a little more closely. So this is 3 years, and I'm going to zoom in. It's going to take a minute. Bear with me. So you can actually go over every one of these dots, and it'll tell you how many cases that property has had in a 3-year period. And so any one of these dots is at least 2 cases in a 3-year period. And so the purpose of this visual here is to sort of show that when we talk about, the comprehensive nature of code enforcement, we are very diligent in how we approach code enforcement. And I think that any questions on this? Does anybody have any questions? Go ahead, Julie.
I don't have a question, but a comment. And especially in the 5-year, you could see the nice chunk where next to Evie Rains Park, that's in Ward 3, Village Greens. We have a nice percentage of those.
Yeah.
Just pointing that out to the group. For some reason, that is our hotspot in Ward 3.
Yeah. All right. So the purpose of that is to sort of show that we have 9,600 single-family residences in Northglenn. We have a total of 14. When you add in the multifamily, it's about 14,000 residential units. But what I wanted to just sort of emphasize is that our code enforcement staff in a 3 or 5 year given period, we are, and by the way, I should back up. We couldn't actually show one case or more because the software would crash. These are properties with 2 or more cases in those time periods. We are virtually hitting almost every single property in Northglenn within a 3 or 5 year time frame. And part of that visual is really sort of tee up this next part of our conversation when we talk about council feedback. What are we trying to accomplish it, and are we accomplishing what we're setting out to do? So any other questions or comments about the heat map?
Brooke, Antonio, I have a question. the HOA at Aspen Park, I noticed was almost clear. Do the code enforcement officers go into the HOA areas?
Yes, we do. Right now, there is approximately 3 HOAs in the city, and we do go in there, and we do not only complaint-based, but proactives in there as well.
Okay. I was just curious because of the surrounding communities. I was wondering how many of their communities or how many of their statistics were related to HOAs, but really just need to focus on Northglenn. Thank you, sir.
Yep. All right, I think we can move on to the next slide. Okay.
Oh, Mayor Pro Tem Wilford, sorry, just saw you.
No worries, thank you. Brooke, do we have any sort of overlay of this map with like our, I guess like the areas that are like high in rentership? Or like, do we have any income overlap information that we can, I guess, kind of put all the pieces together with?
We've not gone down that far down the metrics with this, but we certainly can. I can honestly tell you that when you look at it, I would say we're an equal opportunity enforcer in Northglenn. So, but I will tell you that Councilmember Malika is correct. One of our biggest hotspots is Village Greens. There have been years when we have had a full-time officer dedicated just to the Village Greens development, and it did not change pattern behavior. We still had the same caseload, whether we had a full-time officer working there and just working that neighborhood or not. So, okay. So the next set of slides on council feedback, I want to tell you that I tried to do the best to homogenize everyone's comments, but yet make sure that I at least identified everyone's comments in some context. I may not have put it in the exact phrasing or terminology that you did. So if I didn't capture everything that you guys said, by all means, please know that it wasn't intentional for me to exclude it as much as it was. I was trying to not have 17 slides of council feedback that you guys would just go, yeah, that's the same thing in a different form. So I tried to minimize that because I know how much you enjoy listening to me talk. So, all right, here we go. Issue identification. Go ahead and jump back to that first one again real quick. So neighbor conflicts was really a good identification by a lot of council members. Help neighbors help themselves first, as opposed to calling on code enforcement to solve problems. One size fits all approach may not be right for Northglenn in terms of how we do code enforcement. That was another comment that was a common theme. Next slide. Consistency of enforcement was a concern. The population weaponizing code enforcement, i.e. using this as a tool to instigate neighbor conflicts or neighbor disputes. What is the city trying to solve, and is it succeeding? Next slide. Empathy for all sides. There was a lot of folks who felt like we need to understand both sides of all situations because there are a lot of unique circumstances in our community. Hardship feeds into that. Seniors, at-risk population, fixed income population where people may not have the fiscal means to actually do anything about their non-compliance. And then does the city have the right rules in place? Are we over enforcing? Are we under enforcing? Are we enforcing? Are we focusing our enforcement on the right type of things? So I think that was really sort of a common theme with a lot of folks. I just tried to capture in a paraphrase statement there. Okay, any comments about the feedback? Does anybody want to add or elaborate on any of the feedback before we go to tools in the toolbox?
I see Councilmember Malika and Councilmember Brown.
One thing I just wanted to kind of elaborate on was the weaponizing of code enforcement. I've had residents who've confessed to me that they really feel like code enforcement has been used as a tool to, I guess, make some residents just feel really uncomfortable in their neighborhood, and has been used by some, they feel like it was racist, honestly. They feel like their neighbor was racist. They didn't like the color of their skin, and then they continue to, attack, other neighbors in the community who are people of color. So I think that that's really an important aspect to kind of bring forward and make sure it's something that is part of this conversation. How do we make sure that our own staff, our own city, isn't used as a tool for, racist behavior in the community?
Councilmember Brown.
Brooke, it's been a very, very long time since you've done a PowerPoint. You used to have a really bad reputation for that.
I did, yep.
I have a question, and it's more on the slide before this where we had neighbors helping neighbors first. I know that Thornton has a long-standing program of I think they even call it a clean sweep program, where the neighbors, you can put your stuff out on the curb and they come by and they do large items, small items, trash, And when I lived in Thornton many, many moons ago, I thought it was great because we were able to, people who didn't have a truck to take their stuff to the dump, because I know we have that free dump day and stuff like that, but not everybody has a way to get that taken care of. Have we ever had anything like that in Northglenn?
We haven't. One of the things that we talked about doing years ago for Village Greens, after our full-time employee in the summer didn't work, was to actually do dumpsters and deliver them to the neighborhood and have people utilize that as a tool. What we ran into is how are we equitable in that? Because the concern is that we were favoring one area over another from a public perception standpoint. But I will tell you that I think something like that in the future might actually have merit, especially when we get into some of these tools in the toolbox. But what we came up with as an alternative to targeted troublesome areas with doing something like that was we started with the dumpster days because it was more palatable. It required less staff resources because, the big challenge that we run into when you put a dumpster out like that is the word gets out and then you have contractors coming and they're dumping their construction materials. And then next thing you know, you've got more trash than the dumpster can provide. And then you've got to bring in other equipment to then bring and shove it. And it become a potential Pandora.
I would really like to suggest that, and it may be in your toolbox, that we look at doing something like that. Like I think Thornton does it on a Sunday, or they do it by neighborhood trash or something like that. Because I think that's beneficial for people that can't get out to get things cleaned up. And sometimes that's why they have all the crap on the side of their house or something like that. So
that's a great suggestion.
I would really like to see us move in that direction. I forgot to mention it when we were talking. Thank you very much. And thank you for keeping the PowerPoint to 24 pages.
It would be much shorter if it wasn't for all the council feedback, so.
Gotcha. Thank you very much for looking into that for me, Brooke.
Absolutely. So
Councilmember Goff has a question.
Yes, thank you. And really, I also wanted to thank Brooke for the very organized and succinct presentation of information. I look, we're on feedback already, but I was going to say that I think who knows why we have so many more calls than our neighboring cities, but I would think that part of what we need to do, and I'm just speaking now even to any residents who are listening, is the getting to know your neighbors, kind of creating a culture of people helping each other out rather than, being very critical of things that they aren't meeting expectations according to some standard that they have of how the city's supposed to look. And so, that's kind of a cultural shift, perhaps. I'm not really sure, but I hope that, and it does look like you're going to be addressing some of that. So it's not really a question anymore. Thank you.
All right, I'm sorry, Mayor, could you go back to that slide?
Oh, sure. There you go.
So this next set of, and I want to mention that the next set of slides is what we heard from everybody. And so I'm hoping that part of what I will do is I will try to elaborate a little bit on what's happening behind the scenes now with organizationally with the city staff, but also ideas and suggestions that we just heard. Please feel free to keep them coming fast and strong, because that's what we're here to do. Is the idea of this presentation was to sort of have all of you reflect on what everyone said in a constructive way, so that we can get focused on how you would like to see us move forward. So with that being said, education and outreach. One of the things that we do on a regular basis is we have what I will call canned stories about code enforcement that we do on a cyclical basis, like when hanging trees in the spring, when the snowfall comes. We also, have the spring cleanup. So what we're going to continue to do is work with Diane and her staff to continue to up the ante on our information sharing, which will also fold in some of the other things that you guys have provided feedback through the one-on-ones. Hardship assistance, I believe you all received, if you haven't, you will be, an email regarding hardship assistance, at least as an interim step. However, I think as we move forward in the future from a budgetary standpoint, one thing with hardship assistance is that we probably need to develop a structured program and allocated funding for that. So when we talk about next year's budget, we will be bringing that to council for consideration on that, and help better identify who would qualify and why, and the why for that. And we'd also be working with the judge and the courts as well. Mediation referrals. Rupa and Jessica are working on a comprehensive program that extends beyond code enforcement, but also includes police and other aspects of conflict resolution. And so a lot of what I heard from Heather and I heard from everyone was, how do we stop this neighbor on neighbor challenges that we invariably are always looking and addressing. And so there's another program that will be coming forward to you in future weeks or months that will also be a little bit more robust than what was shared or thought of with the group. And that will also be another future consideration for council. Neighborhood identity development. Sarah did a really good job talking about this through the comp plan. This is actually what I would suggest is that down the road long view item that we'll be talking about. Any questions or comments about any of that feedback?
Councilmember Brown?
Do you think, Brooke, that there is any opportunity for the mediation referrals to push them through CAB?
So I don't want to give too much away, but we are working on something that I think will either meet or exceed council expectation in terms of how best to approach this. I think it's going to depend on how much resource and equity does council want to commit to this. I will tell you, as I've mentioned on the one-on-ones and for the public, is that right now we refer to some remediation service programs that are out there that are either for free, or some of them may have a nominal cost, but we currently provide that. But I think we're trying to figure out a better way to provide that type of service to the community.
Yeah, I would like to see that happen, just from the one situation that I had. Well, actually two, maybe she's been involved in 4. Yeah. So yeah, I would like to see, it doesn't necessarily have to go through CAB, but I would like to see us be able to offer something more than the police showing up at your door.
Yeah. And Heather, would you want to elaborate on any of that, or did I cover it pretty well?
I think you covered it pretty well, Brooke. The only thing I would emphasize is that, we're trying to design a program that is flexible, because every situation seems to be unique and different, right? in differing even in intensity. So, this coupled with the work that we're looking at with the PD co-response unit, there's some opportunities to connect things, and we'll bring these items forward as budget requests for 2022 budget. That's the plan right now.
Thank you.
Okay. I want to make sure Heather weighed in on that because I know how important that was, because I think universally, I think everybody had an opinion about that. So other tools in the toolbox is more council updates and ongoing reporting. I will tell you that when I first got here, we used to do weekly reports to the city manager that got forwarded on to council. It wasn't very good content, but we would be happy to provide quarterly updates or monthly updates, depending on if that's something council would like to see in terms of what's happening in their ward. One of the things that we're going to be looking to do with the CRM, the community relations management software, is to be able to allow you to be able to go and look at a map like the one you just saw and be able to see what's going on in the neighborhood. So we are working on that. That's probably a down the road exercise, but that's something else that we're looking to. Another big comment was community and volunteer programs. So I know that we've had specific cases where we had folks who were elderly who just either were mentally or physically incapable of doing certain things, and the neighbors would come out and actually, come together and work for that. And I think that's something else that we can also work to promote and promulgate in the community, which reinforces the DEI as well as just neighborhood identity. Also, there was a lot of good feedback about researching what outside agencies and other programs that are available. So we are also looking at into that as well, and we can provide more information. Anecdotally, we have had a number of communities look to us as to how to ratchet up code enforcement, because we have probably one of the most aggressive code enforcement policies. And if Corey was here right now, he would be nodding his head vigorously. I think the judge may still be on the call, and I know that she might have an opinion on that as well. But yeah, so we are also going to see what other folks are doing and how they are doing it. If they're doing it differently, we will also bring that into the conversation. Okay, I think we
see nothing. All right.
So moving forward, as I alluded to, we're going to increase awareness and education. One of the things that we also heard was community survey from several folks and outreach. So that's something where I think we could figure out a strategic approach to asking the right question in the right way to sort of elicit to see where is the community on code enforcement, which may help us derive hotspots of concern. Also may help us understand that, is it a live and let live mentality, or is it more of, we need to enforce everything to the nth degree every day, all the time, and try to get a sense of where the community is on a spectrum of some measurable scale to sort of get a sense of where that is. And so that's something else we will look into. Engage community at a more base level. The block party program was mentioned. I will tell you that I've talked with Diana and Rupa about how we might be able to get that started sooner than later. My only concern with the block party trailer is that I don't want to do anything with Tri-County Health and with the variability of where things are right now to go out and start promoting something and then have to take it back, because a lot of people will want to reserve this weeks or months in advance and things can change. But I do believe that this is another great resource for our organization to help that. And I believe there's a lot more that we're going to do through the comp plan that will, if anything, seed plant the continuity to establish that neighborhood identity and hopefully move that engaged community aspect further along. Also, utilizing ward meetings for outreach. And I think this is not necessarily, let's hear the complaints, but let's also have a strategy on, if we utilize ward meetings, on how to engage those who attend about the meaningfulness of code enforcement and where it sits with them, similar to like what the survey and outreach might be. And yet again, as I said earlier, maximize communication platforms that we have with the city.
Oh, Councilmember Goff.
Thank you. I know we're not really getting into that level of detail, and as you mentioned, some of this is overlapping with the comprehensive plan that you presented earlier, but I was thinking along the lines of the block party as being something that we don't necessarily have to wait for a resident to request it, but that we might just sort of do a pop-up and set it up somewhere, you know, without even a lot of advance notice, so that we don't have to expect a huge crowd and then engage with residents that show up.
And you know, those neighborhood champions might be the perfect catalyst for that, assuming that it's safe to do that. So, okay. So I think Becky has her hand up.
Oh, Councilmember Brown.
I have one other question. Have we ever done, you know how Excel does their day of service, but it's all over the place. Have we ever done a day of service in Northglenn where we actually call out volunteers to help out with other people? I mean, I know that people have done it, but I'm wondering if that would be even beneficial.
I think that might be a bigger conversation that's not just for code enforcement, but I think that's something else that would be a great community engagement asset.
My concern would we need to find out our liability on it, but I think I really like that. And then, as Catherine said, it would be nice to maybe combine the two events, a day of service and then the block party, you know, to celebrate those who participated. It's just a suggestion.
Great.
Thank
okay. The next couple slides, and by the way, we're getting close to the end. And just so you know, the last slide just says questions. So, you know, you can count one more off. So moving forward, and touched on this a lot, addressing neighbor on neighborhood conflict. And what my thought process is that my direction to staff is that if you get a complaint and you go out there and it's a complaint, you write it up. And if you see the same violation down the street, you write everybody else up for that complaint. And I don't want to quite say it's scorched earth, but it's about as close as you get to that when looking at how we approach code enforcement. So one of the things I want to put out there that I heard that I think is something that is worth conversation here is an alternative engagement approach with residents. And instead of just addressing a complaint, we try to find out if there's a root cause. And I can tell you when talking with the staff that the majority of these types of complaints that we get are the more nascent, less high priority, life safety type complaints. It's because there's something else going on. And what I want to propose, and this isn't something we're going to turn a switch and start doing tomorrow, but is to develop a program or at least an engagement strategy with the staff to sort of figure out what's really going on. Because when we're dealing with selective complaints and you can clearly see that the neighbors all around have the same violation or similar violations, and yet there's no complaint from this person on it, we know there's got to be something else going on. And so rather than going out and taking the scorched earth approach, is really trying to say what's really happening here and what can we do to help solve this, because there's something else going on. And maybe there isn't, but once again, if we get a complaint, we're going to enforce it. This isn't saying that, we're going to not enforce something, as much as it is we want to try to understand what's really going on so as to maybe not have it as an ongoing thing and de-escalating what I think has been referred to as the weaponizing factor. Okay. Any comments on that?
Nope.
All right. So this is something else that also came up that I think was a great suggestion, which is setting priorities for enforcement with criteria. And the idea being is that we would break this up into 3 categories. Health, life, safety. Is it an imminent life safety issue? That should be a top priority. Significant non-compliance would be like a second priority, and a de-emphasis on non-health, life safety, proactive enforcement. And let me just clarify on this particular slide that if our officers are out there, it's not that this is, let's turn a blind eye to things, as much as it is that we're not going to go out and try to write everything up we see on a street, as much as it is that we're going to focus on, we're going to have a prioritization of what the officers would focus on. And ultimately, I don't see this changing caseload. I don't see this changing how our performance is, as much as it is how we focus on what we do. I would also mention that this set of criteria would not apply to complaints. So if we get a complaint and there's a violation, we're going to write it up. This is really more focusing on how our officers go out in the field and are approaching code enforcement as a general rule. One of the things that I asked the staff to do is to sort of start to group and identify what code provisions would fall under these categories. And so when we come back to you in the follow-up meeting, if council likes this approach, we will have those provisions broken out into these types of categories or categories similar to this. I was informed by the supervisor that there is another fourth category, which is department assist, because we do quite a bit of department assist enforcement with the community, within the departments as well. So, you know, if there's a busted water meter at a multifamily property, we actually go out and issue the notice and things of that nature. So, any thoughts or comments on this slide? I mean, this is like the juiciest slide there, guys. Come on. I mean, this is the exciting part.
Councilmember Goff.
Okay, I'll ask a question. So could you give me an example of significant non-compliance? Are we talking about repeat offenders or is it something else?
No, what we would be talking about, significant non-compliance would be like landscaping. So it's not a health safety issue, but it's a nuisance issue. You know, let's just say that there is construction material in the driveway from a past project that they have piled up. That would be a significant non-compliance, but it's not a health and life safety issue. So health and life safety is like a tree falling over the street, or, you know, somebody having their vehicle parked in such a way that it causes a traffic hazard or things of that nature. So, and we will come back and kind of enumerate what those policies would actually look like.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So for the next, so what we would do is if the council likes what they're hearing tonight in terms of some of these ideas and approaches, what I would propose is that our enforcement strategy with these criteria would actually be updated in the staff policy and procedure manual, which you will be thankful I did not attach to your packet because it is about that thick of every single step that we do for every enforcement measure we have. But what we would do is we would update it, prioritize the prioritization of the regulations, establish what I would call discretionary guidelines, which is really trying to apply, you know, is there a neighbor complaint here? Are we going out to enforce just so that we're enforcing to enforce, or are we enforcing because we're trying to have an impactful, you know, meaningful impact in areas that need it? Also, and this is something that's going to be a little bit more time out or time further out in the schedule, is applying an equity filter. And with the DEI and the stuff that we have going on right now is really sort of helping train up the staff. They already do a lot of annual training in terms of verbal judo and de-escalation and whatnot, but also really kind of diving a little bit deeper into equity and how we apply an equity filter to circumstances as well. And then we would come back with an implementation timeline. And so implementation timeline, sorry, that's a repeat. The other part of this is just, you know, the shift in the operational approach and then the equity filter application. So these are the types of things that we want to bring back to council in terms of how we would frame what we heard from you and put it into these sort of filters as a meaningful direction for level of service. I think the last slide, are we next in their last slide? Yeah, questions, there you go.
Questions. Any final questions or comments for Brooke? Councilmember Mullica.
Yeah, I don't have any more questions, but I do appreciate you putting the work into this because I think it is important to review how we do code enforcement throughout our city, and especially in particular areas like Village Greens. That's the number one complaint I get all the time, and so how do we manage it differently throughout the city? I think is a good approach to consider. And then I also really appreciate you applying that equity perspective and training around that, because I'm not sure if other members of council have received complaints, but I have personally several. And so I think it's a really important perspective to bring to code enforcement, as well as, how to just make sure that, residents who are people of color don't feel victimized by their neighbors and code enforcement. So I think both of those are really important. Thank you.
So let me just throw out, is it the general consensus of the council that what they're hearing tonight in terms of what we discussed under next steps seems like the right approach in terms of what they would like us to see come back with? Great. And I want to thank you all for taking the time to do the one-on-ones and also going through this. I will tell you that code enforcement is a very complicated thing, and I really appreciate having this conversation and also, sharing your feedback, because, our job is to meet your expectation, and we want to do it right, and we want to serve the community as best we can. So I really appreciate everyone's time and effort, and also enduring through a planning director presentation as the last agenda item on a study session.
You are so forgiven. You haven't done a PowerPoint presentation in so long. I kind of enjoyed it and felt like it was a little short.
Okay. Hey, Becky and is Sarah still here? Becky is here. She'll make note of that we'll drag ours out for the next one. We'll have videos.
Becky, no.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Brooke. And that was the last item. Are there any other items for council tonight?
Not this evening, Mayor.
Okay, seeing none, we are adjourned. Have a great night, everybody.
Night.
Thank you.